Today's guest is one of the leading experts on family wealth and family business, helping entrepreneurs navigate one of the toughest challenges of success. Not building wealth, but making sure it strengthens rather than damages the family. In this episode, we break down what separates families that successfully pass down businesses and wealth from those that don't. You'll learn how to avoid raising entitled kids, why the next generation should earn their place in the family business, and the conversations every business owner should be having long before succession becomes a reality. Whether you're building a business, raising a family, or thinking about the legacy you'll leave behind, this conversation is packed with practical advice.
Hey everyone, welcome to Business Unchained, the podcast where entrepreneurs come together to build businesses that are stronger, more valuable, and fully in their control. I'm Bobby Mascia, a serial entrepreneur, wealth advisor, author, and the founder of the Exit Ready Institute, a structured program that helps entrepreneurs align business growth with personal wealth to build one cohesive strategy that takes the business beyond them. Because here's the truth, being exit ready isn't about the exit, it's about the readiness. Because exit ready businesses are just simply better businesses to own. If you're ready to gain clarity, take control, and unlock the full value of what you've built, you're in the right place. So let's go.
Bobby Mascia is the founder and CEO of Greenridge Wealth Planning. All opinions expressed by Bobby and his guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinion of Greenridge Wealth Planning. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for any financial decisions. Clients of Greenridge Wealth Planning may maintain positions in any securities discussed in this podcast.
Please welcome family business and wealth consultant Jeff Savlov.
My work is not just about fighting families. People sort of go there when they hear my background, and a lot of the best work that I do and most interesting work and powerful work for families is to really get ahead of all kinds of family development stuff around wealth before there's a big problem. Yeah. So when kids are young, before even having kids, thinking through how we're going to raise them. Yeah, that's one point I like to make, and often that gets missed, and people just think he's the business shrink for fighting families.
I'm excited to have you on today because I had some conversations around family business and, the family dynamics around wealth and how different families deal with certain conversations, what the more successful ones do in terms of communicating and making sure that everything is integrated versus some of the ones that are a little bit more, let's say, struggling in that area because maybe instead of being proactive and having that conversation of how do I do it, they're reactive and they're coming to you and they're saying, how do I fix it?
How do I fix it? Or have been really secretive, in an extreme.
Yeah. So, give me a little bit of an idea in terms of, when you think about family wealth, and let's say it's matriarch, patriarch, built successful business or wealth in some fashion, and they're thinking about kids, like, how do you get into the conversation? How does this usually get initiated? What are some of the things that you see at the top of the charts in terms of like most frequently asked, most frequently addressing?
As you and I have talked about before, there's proactive and reactive. The most proactive you can get, I have something called the Purposeful Legacy Family Project, where families will reach out, couples will reach out before they even have children when there's serious, family generational wealth, and they're looking to make meaning of money and purpose and materialism and all that stuff as a couple, so that their marriage is strong, so that they're on the same page where they can be, so they can understand where they're on different pages and manage that, all with an eye toward strong marriage and how do we start to raise kids even before they're having kids. That's pretty proactive. I only get a few of those and they're really wonderful.
Do you find that those are more second generation wealth already, or those are people who have maybe later in life relationships that are growing to marriage? That's usually the dynamic of those couples.
Never thought about it, but now that I think about it, when you ask, it's a mix. Certainly the more recent generations are more open to all kinds of things and kind of open communication, right? The baby boomers were not real open, and the folks before them, the traditionalists, didn't talk about anything. It's a mix of wealth creators, but tend to be on the maybe 30s and 40-year-old side, and then maybe second gen folks who have seen what they went through and they want to do it a little bit differently or better with their kids. And so, those folks, they're just looking at, what are our values? How can money serve purpose? How can we be intentional and defining purpose? And how can we be intentional with our children? And the beauty there is, when you're talking about under 5 years old, kids don't even understand what money is.
No.
It's about, walking the walk around values. If your values are around eating healthy, eat healthy with your kids. If your values are around reading, make sure you're reading with your kids. If your values are around fitness, go out and play a lot with your kids. Take them to the gym. Whatever the values are, walk the walk. And then money gets plugged in later. It's about really getting clear on the values and the purpose of life and really walking the walk and living it. As you get older, kids have experienced more and more of whatever it is the parents were doing, whether it was in line with values or not, and they've seen all that, and that can get really complicated. And the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that's one of my favorite sayings, because so many wealth creators, especially wealth creators that came from poverty or working class backgrounds, they feel like they work so hard. And they just don't want their kids to have such a hard life. Many wealth creators from the poor and working class background have that mentality. And so out of the goodness of their hearts, they try to be generous. They try to make life a little easier. They try to give material things that maybe they didn't have growing up. But the kids only know this stuff's coming out of nowhere. I don't have to work all that hard, and all kinds of great stuff's put in my lap, and they don't get work ethic. And then these same wealth creators, I talked to a guy recently in his 90s who was crying. His kids and grandkids were all just a mess. Many of them had sort of no-show jobs in the business. They were no-show because people rather they didn't show up than show up and make things worse for the non-family executives. And the guy's crying. He came from abject poverty in New York City, immigrant, third grade education, shining shoes, 7 days a week, working 12 hours, doing whatever he could. And all he could think of is, I don't want my kids to have that kind of pain. That's really loving stuff, right?
Yeah.
But he went ahead and spoiled them beyond, any sort of accountability or work ethic, and, private schools, whatever car you want pretty much when you turn 17 or driver's license age, and, paid for college. Some finished, some didn't. And then they sort of all came to the company and were kind of useless. But pissing off the non-family folks who were like, we're trying to run a company here, and you're just throwing like challenges at us. That's sort of the downside of what started with out of love, right? This was done out of love. I don't want you to have the hard life I did. And it turns into a nightmare. So it's really helping.
So let me ask you a question around that, because I think that that's probably one of the more, let's say the more extreme case in the terms of we have this money and our kids are entitled. And I think you mentioned something that I talk about a lot too, is most parents want their kids to have better than what they had. And in the pursuit of providing them with better, there's this word called entitlement that gets thrown around. Like, I don't want my kids to be entitled. I don't want my kids to be spoiled. I don't want my kids to lose work ethic. Now, if you look at the dynamic of trying to incentivize them and giving them more, how do you address the needs of the parents to say, I want my kids to have more, but I want them to continue to kind of want and have work ethic. So what's the right recipe to build a good human being under the auspices of there's wealth and there's money and there's opportunities that you didn't have when you were growing up? So now maybe the lens needs to be refocused in a different way.
Yeah, there's a famous psychoanalyst. His name was Heinz Kohut, and he talked about healthy development of a human, and he talked about the idea of optimal frustration. He could have called it optimal gratification, but he really landed on the side of frustration. And optimal frustration means a parent's job is to make life the right amount of challenging and frustrating for a kid. It's not to make it as easy as possible. And that's a really core tenet of this, of sort of family wealth and parenting. How do you challenge kids and give them a sense of joy in doing hard things, sometimes failing, keep plugging away, having that good feeling of success, of succeeding sometimes, but it's not easy. You fail sometimes, you keep going, and sometimes you succeed. And that's really a key element. You can go on nice vacations, you can have private jets, you can also have kids do some of the gardening, mow the lawn, power wash something outside, and connect it and make their own money and pay for things. I am not as wealthy as almost all of the clients that I serve, but my wife and I walk the walk around this. And 90% of what I talk about around parenting and wealth makes sense for poor and working class people. It's that poor and working class people have an automatic consequence built in. Life is coming and there's nothing that's going to be able to save it. When there is significant wealth, you can do things to make life a little bit easier in certain ways, and then the natural consequences are lost.
Yeah, I try to build up as many core values as I can within the fabric of my kids. And I don't know if sometimes that's lost. A lot of the conversations that my wife and I typically have is the whole concept around saving, especially when it comes to saving them when they forget something and they go to school. And my mentality is let them deal with the consequences. Hers is I got to bring it to school. Now that's probably not every time, but
Right.
I would say I'm probably more the hard ass than she is. Do you find that things like that are character building, or where do you, where do you make compromise? Where do you think about that with kids?
It's a balance. And 3 different kids in the same family could have 3 different needs in terms of how much you got to push them to take responsibility and how much you can help them out, and they're still going to naturally try hard. But my wife and I, we had our kids when it was time for smartphones, to buy the smartphone with their own money. We had them pay us $30 a month for data, because that was how it worked. You had to buy the phone and pay for the data. And they were pissed, and they were like, what are you doing? None of our friends are paying for their phone, paying for data. This is insanity. And we explained to them the reason why, and they weren't thrilled about it. But I think when our older guy was maybe a junior in college, he was like, guys, thank you so much. I get it now. You're not trying to be friends with your kids when you're parenting them. You're lucky if you get the gratitude later in life. But he said, I'm surrounded by kids that they have credit cards they're just charging up. They can't pay it off. They can't balance a checkbook. They don't know how to manage money. And I learned how to do that stuff. And now it makes sense to me.
And you're right. I mean, from my oldest to my middle to my youngest, I have to address things differently with the 3 of them. And the hardest part is at certain times, it seems like favoritism. And it's not about favoritism. It's more about how they react to certain rewards or consequences. And it just has to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when there's an operating business in a family, I'm a big fan of really insisting that kids go somewhere else. Maybe in middle school, high school, in the summers, they can sort of get some experience and really be careful and make sure they're working hard. Make sure the non-family employees see the kids working hard and doing basic ground level stuff. Maybe getting some exposure to higher level stuff. But they should be working hard and be expected to do a really good job. But after college, if the kids go to college, I'm a big fan of go somewhere else, get your own job without any family connections, do a good job, maybe get a promotion, and then come back to the family business. And not all families agree with that. Plenty disagree hard, and they feel like my kids are my biggest asset. I trust them. I love them. I have faith in them. I want them as soon as possible. And I see even within families a split. One kid goes out, one kid stays in, and there are pros and cons to it. But from everything I've seen, I've just seen so much pain from kids getting access to levels of money and levels of responsibility that are beyond anything they've earned. And it's not a good formula for long-term success.
I find it interesting is the concept of people who want to just take their kids right from college and put them into the family business. And the reason why, I like to think about other options outside of the family business as their first step is, number one, it's important to learn the hierarchy of life when you're in the working world. It's a lot different than when you are in college. It also teaches you how to work with people differently, because now you're in an environment where you're the odd man out until you've established yourself as being part of the overall working team. And from a family business, you're not the odd man out in day one. You're the proverbial child who's come home to take over. And that also is unfortunately some of the sentiment that gets transferred to employees and other family members when that happens inside of a family business. And the idea of here's what your career path looks like, here are the different benchmarks that you're going to have to reach through time, and actually treating them like an employee also becomes an issue. How do you work with families? I mean, do you find that to be true? Do you find other dynamics to be a little bit more true than that? What's kind of your experience in seeing that?
Yeah, when your last name is, sort of the business name, that's a clear, you're a part of the family ownership group or about to be, there's just a whole different dynamic and people are going to treat you differently. They're going to laugh harder at your jokes. They're going to tell you your ideas are better and it doesn't help your development. It's hard to get good feedback when a parent has two, I have one right now, two siblings, one is kicking ass and the other is screwing up and the parents just can't confront the one who's screwing up. So you really have a sibling losing a few $1,000,000 a year that could be split between the two siblings, literally in your pocket, 1.5 million each in addition to all your other comp. Instead, it's just going out the window because one sibling isn't getting the feedback, isn't being confronted, isn't being held accountable. Now it's hard to fire a child. And if they're not rising to the challenge of development, that's a really tough situation. In this case, they're just blowing millions and burning it up. And the sibling who's working hard feels like I shouldn't have to lose 1.5 million in comp for my family because you won't confront my sister. And that's the dark side of this. And it tears families and businesses apart. In this situation I'm referring to, it's not clear the business will survive and the family is really at the edge in various ways.
So how do you think about that when you're going into a situation and you're called upon to come in and fix it? What are some of the things that you start to contemplate in implementing or conversations you start with the family, or what's kind of the process when you go in and deal with something like this?
So don't forget to bring me back to this exact case. I just want to say quickly, a quick tangent, which is, I get situations on the opposite, which is proactive. And just to name one, guy starts a restaurant, goes into a chain worth a few $1 billion. His kids are in their early 30s and married. The grandkids are just starting to be born and he's worth, maybe 75 million. And after he sells the whole thing, which he's looking to do, he'll be worth, sort of a billion or two. He sat down with all the kids who all went to college, have jobs, they're responsible. And he said, hey, here's what my current net worth is. Here's what it's about to be. I want to share it with you guys in some tax efficient way, responsible way, but I want you to have a voice in it. And he tried to facilitate meetings around it. And the kids were like, Dad, we love you. This is so generous, but we'd rather you were our father, not the facilitator. Can we get someone outside to help us? And I was brought in there. That is very different than coming back to before that tangent, the reactive, which is it's a mess. One of the kids is not letting the parents see the grandkids because they feel just so abandoned. The one that's working hard feels like they've just been abandoned by their parents as the sister's allowed to just go wild and lose money. So when I'm brought into a situation like that, I told them up front, this is really, really difficult. It's going to be painful. I'm not sure that I can help you because you guys can't even agree on a goal. Is the goal for the son to develop himself, if it's even possible, and for the siblings to work together? The other sibling feels like, I can't work with my sister. She's not developable. And we just need to sell this whole thing while it's still valuable. So they didn't even have the same goal. So I say, I'm not sure what I can do, but I can tell you that I will give you a real accurate assessment of what's going on and it's going to hurt. Are you all up for that? And they all said they were. The truth was, I interviewed non-family employees, everyone in the family, other consultants that they've worked with. They've had a bunch of consultants. And some of the consultants were sort of business consultants. Some were more psychologists. I happen to have the psychology and business background, and I'm the first one that had both of those. So there's a little bit of a different approach. But the truth was the sister who was losing the millions couldn't really handle the feedback. And that's really where I'm at with them now, is it's the first time they really had to sit and look at reality. Mom and Dad, you let this happen. You didn't run the business like a business. Your one child is angry how hard they've worked. The other sister is angry about the feedback and that there's no clear and easy answer. So we're working through that, but that's sort of a real life example.
And I think that's part of when you break down a family business and you have the children who are coming in, each side has expectations, right? Child expects something out of coming into the family business. Parents expect something from the child and coming into the family business. And do you see that those expectations are often communicated, or they're often headed in different directions, and it isn't until they become solidified in their minds where that friction or that let's put the gloves on in battle starts to transpire?
It's a great question. Often they are not communicated the expectations up front and clarified and formalized, when I'm lucky to get in early, like a family says, hey, we're thinking of our kids are in college, getting MBAs, have other experience, but they want to come back and work in the business, that's a chance to say, let's get really clear about what the expectations are. And what is your development going to look like? And how are we going to figure out your role? And what's the process of figuring out your role? And what's the process of determining if you're doing a good job or not? And what's the process of sort of figuring out further development when you're not maybe developing the way we hoped? And how do we decide maybe this is not a good fit? Having those conversations up front, that's the proactive, that's unusual. A lot of times this stuff, it's the gloves are already on the way you said it. And it comes down to different expectations along the way. Sometimes the senior generation can be really unreasonable about what they expect, and no one will ever be as good as me. Or maybe the founder, the first generation, was just an amazing sales kind of relationship person. And the next generation is an amazing, maybe technical manager kind of person. And you don't have to have the same skills as the person who founded the business. You just have to know what are your skills, how to find the right role for you, and find someone else to do what mom or dad used to do. But often families don't do that. And the assumption is, this is my kid, I did it, they should be able to do it with my genes. And, suddenly it's like, what's happening? They're not like me. They're not doing it the way I did.
Well, how do you get around that? Because a lot of that is also this self-perception, your own self-reality of who you believe you are in relation to the business. More often than not, dad's always going to be dad, mom's always going to be mom, kid's always going to be kid. The history that's been developed over the decades that they've, known each other and been together influences the present. How do you get around some of that control issue and some of those, even with the sisters that you were talking about and the friction? It could be something along the lines of, well, we're having a business conversation and you know what? They always fucking do this to me. You did this to me ever since we were little kids, and you used to do this and you used to do that. And it has
F-bombs
nothing to
now.
do.
Wow, we're really getting juicy.
Yeah. It has nothing to do with what's going on in the moment, because now you're leeching in bad history. So how do you manage through? I mean, what are the warning signs that typically show up when it's becoming dangerous, when it's becoming something, overwhelming that could break up a family, break up a business? And how do you deal with some of those control issues that need to be released a little bit when there's kids involved?
I'd say two big warning signs are a family member's in a role and clearly they're not performing. It's obvious to everyone, particularly the non-family executives and even people at the kind of the bottom of the business food chain can see that this is someone who's from the family, not competent, not performing, and they're being allowed to go on like that. That's one piece. Another piece is when really ugly personal stuff, family history from a long time ago, or even current family issues. I mean, I've had siblings say outrageously mean personal things that were true from their personal life of their sibling, like around elements of a sibling's unfulfilling sex life with their partner be brought up in front of employees in a very specific, humiliating way. That's really a pretty obvious red flag. When it's that ugly, that public, that hurtful, it's hard to come back from that. So not performing, and it's clear, and the kind of mean-spiritedness and personal attacks, that's close to too far gone in many cases.
If we go back to that, one sibling was working hard, the other one was not. How do you address that? Like, what are some of the things and the tools that you reach into that some of the listeners that are hearing when they think about, oh man, I have some friction like that starting to brew? What are some of the things that you think about as early helpful exercises or mindset shifts or something that gets them kind of moving in the right direction, or thinking about like, man, I can't do that on my own. I need you, Jeff. We need you to come in.
Part of it is having an advisory board, or if there's a fiduciary board, but if you have some kind of group of outside or non-family members who really have been there. The example I was talking about, there's a kind of an outside consultant that's been there for 25 years and saw everything, but didn't have sort of my skill set or even the permission of the family to sort of name all of it. He could name the business financial stuff and some of the dynamics, but didn't quite have that. So families to rely on trusted non-family advisors in the system, put together an advisory board, not mom or dad's, friends or golf buddies, but really outside independent people that understand business, maybe came from a family business and can see what's going on and give you some feedback. And as a family, try to sort of digest that and say, what kind of shifts do we need to make? Can we make the kinds of shifts we need to make? When I come in, I do a very thorough assessment and with the family's permission, give them some pretty tough feedback and then see where they want to go from there. That comes down to self-reflection, the ability to self-reflect, to look honestly at yourself and then make changes. Not everyone has that. So the family members who are willing to say, ouch, that hurts, it feels kind of true. Let me ask some people I trust. Okay, this is very true. I need to work on this and I need to do a better job. That's a hopeful sign. When family members are like defensive, they don't believe the feedback, even though it's coming from all around them. Everyone, family and non-family, can see it, and they feel like I'm just being treated unfairly. This is a witch hunt. That's not a great prognosis.
What about, like you mentioned before, you have the parent who is running the business who says, this child is not going to be like me. To your relationship with that was the person who was really good at maybe sales and strategy, but not the technician. The kids are more technician. How do you look at the roles in the current structure? Because let's say that person is, it's my son, and the prodigal son has to be the CEO, and you put him in the CEO, path, and he's just not doing well because that's not really his lane where he excels. How do you address some of that?
Very tough. Some families refuse, and they want to hire and pay money after money after money to find coaches who can, coach them up. And there's this fantasy that it's a kind of a coaching development issue. And sometimes it's just not, and families don't want to see it. So that's just really.
Do you find that the kids don't see it as well, or you think that it's more driven by the parents?
It's different. Sometimes the kids don't see it, but they feel pressured by the parents to be the prodigal son or daughter who was always supposed to be in this role. So they don't even want to be there. Sometimes they need permission to tell mom and dad, can I just be kind of an owner outside and not be a manager operator? And it's disappointing to the parents. Or sometimes they're able to say it, and the parents are like, I wish you would have told me this a long time ago. We're fine hearing that. Why did you tell us that? We didn't want to put you in an awful situation. So that one plays out a lot of different ways.
Hey guys, Bobby Mascia here. I wanted to just take a second to thank everyone who's been tuning into Business Unchained since day one. This community, it means a lot to me. And I'm super excited to finally be able to share a big project that I've been working on for some time now, which is my book, Unchained, the raw truth about entrepreneurship, family business, and life balance. It's part memoir, part roadmap, and it just dives deep into my story, the experiences, the mistakes, and the lessons that have shaped how I think about building a business and life. Everything I talk about on the show is rooted in that journey, and in the book, I dig that much deeper. Unchained's available now. Grab your copy through the link or the show notes, or head over to bobbymascia.com. I appreciate you all, and I'm now taking you back into the show. Thank you.
So I want to pick your brain a little bit on something that I've been thinking about, because I have 3 kids. My oldest is a sophomore in high school. My middle guy's a freshman in high school. My youngest is 10. They've all expressed, not because I've influenced it, but they've all expressed the interest in, Daddy, we want to work with you when we get older. And I've been thinking about that for the past couple of years of how I envision that ever coming true. And I've gone through different stages in my own mind, having dealt with family business and other clients that have been dealing with family issues. I'm trying to think like, how do I get this to actually work? One of the things that I thought about was just selling everything and helping them to find their own passion. The other thing that I was thinking about was, you know what? Go get a job. The first thing was always go get a job, because I want them to go and experience what it's like to work for somebody else and build a new skill set of how to think about things. Because if they come and work under my influence, I don't want them to think like I think. I want them to be able to challenge and think outside the box a little bit. So one of my most recent conversations with myself has been, what if they go and they work for somebody else, and then I make them start their own business that is a competitive business to my business, if that's what they want to do. Compete with me. Go build something
and feel the pain and learn how to turn something from nothing to something. And whether you succeed or you fail, in failing, you will succeed. And you'll be more, I would say, prepared to come in and address things than if I just kind of take you in under my wing. I don't know what to do.
Want some thoughts?
I want you to beat me up on this.
I'll be gentle, but look, there's no right or wrong.
I didn't ask for gentle. I want you to be tough on me.
Okay, well, in that plan, you're giving them the seed money, it sounds like, to start a business. And so even there is sort of a pile of cash that they didn't have to work for. It could work, and you can put parameters.
I'm not giving them a pile of cash. I want them to turn nothing into something.
Oh, so you're not going to give them seed money?
No.
Okay, then I like it better. But even just go work for it, whether it's, in some of the other like Dunkin' related businesses, or whether it's in the financial services, have them work for a competitor and see if they can they get hired? Can they do a good job? Can they develop business? Can they, increase the size of their clients or whatever the metrics might be? Have them go to a competitor and work there. Certainly the option of having them start their own, but right out of college, that's just, everyone's got to start somewhere. So it's a little unrealistic that they could start on their own out of nowhere.
No, I want them to get a job. And then if they want to come on board, they've got to see what it's like to actually start a business.
Yeah. That might be too rough.
Yeah.
Only because it's so hard and they might not have the entrepreneurial mindset. So, it might be different for each kid, but I think certainly if they want to go that route, if they don't want to go that route, I think certainly working somewhere else and then coming into the family business and being really clear about what the parameters are, what the expectations are, how can they learn and develop. I have an article, I can share it with you. It's meant for elementary and middle school kids. And it's a lot of questions, conversation starters to have with kids in elementary and middle school when there's a family business, just to help them think about what could be. And I think a lot of them would be useful for you and your wife and your kids to sit down and talk about together. If you all come into the family business, how are we going to assess if you're all good at what you're doing? Since you have the family name, how can we tell if you're all good? What if one of you is really good at it and one of you's okay at it and one of you's really awful? Should I be firing the one who's awful? Can you handle that? Can we still have a good family relationship if I have to fire one or two of you and keep one or two of you? And just have those conversations before anyone is working in the business. That opens everyone's minds to like a lot of different angles on all this, that it'll just help people make better decisions down the road to really look at these different angles. Can the three of you own a business together? Can you ever have three presidents or three CEOs? Or would one of you have to be the president or CEO and the other two work for that one? What do you think are the pros and cons of three co-CEOs? And what do you think are the pros and cons of one where the siblings are working for them? Ask your kids and have a conversation, you and your wife and the kids, to see how they can sort of look at the complexity of those ideas and really be realistic about it. Not enough families are doing that before getting to the, college and post-college piece, just to think through a lot of the different angles and open their minds to how hard and complex this could be.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm trying to figure out in that whole process is the hustle. And my hustle came from wanting things that I never could afford. My parents never gave me anything. It was almost like I wanted what I couldn't have. And my kids my kids don't experience that because it's a different life. Like I'm not going to sacrifice my own. I worked my ass off to get where I am. And now I've earned the right to have the luxuries that I want. And they get to sit shotgun in that whole process. Yeah. Like that wasn't my family life growing up. So it's a lot different in terms of like my parents versus me and my wife. So how do you instill that hustle?
You got to build it in. Like I was saying, we had our kids pay for the iPhone. We had them pay for data.
Do I drop them in Manhattan and say, figure out how to get home? Like, how do I?
That's a possibility. My older son wants to come into my world, and he was thinking of taking like middle school and early high school kids and doing that kind of a thing. Take them to a middle of a city somewhere. And for wealthy, like my wealthy clients who want to develop their kids, he would take them to the middle of a city and say, okay, you got to get home. But he would supervise them and make sure they don't get like mugged or killed or anything. But that's a good example example, but it's building it in along the way. I've had families with, properties all in all the wealthiest cities in the world and private jets and all of that. And the kids had to, ride a bike to school, couldn't take the family car, had to walk to school, had to get a job. We had our kids work illegally young. They were 13, 14.
Mm-hmm.
We love sushi. There's a sushi place by us, and we've been going really since they were born. They got to know all the sushi makers, and we all knew each other. And when they got to be around 13 or so, the owner's like, "Why don't you work here? You're here all the time. You eat our stuff. Why don't you work here?" And paid them under the table, so they got to have cash in their hand every night, and they were just sweeping floors like dogs, and I loved it. And they were also watching men in their 40s and 50s, mostly from like the Philippines, Indonesia, very poor, came to America to work these crazy hours just to make enough money to send back to their wives and kids. And they saw these guys, living together in a small apartment right near the sushi place, and they saw a different kind of reality. So to see people who don't have very much and how hard and ugly life can be. So these guys would walk in snowstorms and in rain, any weather. They had to walk to and from the sushi place. When my sons got old enough to drive, they would hang out like an hour after they were done getting paid and could go home just to drive these guys in a warm car when the weather was crappy. And sometimes the guys would invite them in. And these men would take off their shoes and their feet would be just purple and blistered because they're standing up making sushi like 12 hours a day. And my sons were just shocked at all this. And here's these 17-year-old boys with cars helping these 50-year-old men. And it really shocked them into a sense of gratitude. But they also had to work their butts off. And my sons wanted to try making sushi. So as they're mopping the floor and getting feedback about how you're not mopping well enough, and the owner was on them, like, you're not painting the floor, she would say. It's not about moving the water all over. You got to clean the dirt off, rub it. But then they taught them how to make a simple roll and then a complex roll and use the deep fryer for the tempura. These kids, they didn't have to work at all. But they had that experience, the pride of dunking some shrimp and batter in the deep fryer, of making a roll and having this 50-year-old Indonesian guy say, "Finally, you got it right," and feeling proud. You can build that in regardless of your level of wealth. It's about being intentional about giving kids those experiences.
So what are your thoughts about the flip side? Because this is another conversation that I've had with my wife in terms of allowing them to experience the luxuries that we've been able to create, and then putting them in a situation where it's like, oh, but if you want that, that's not what you get. When you're in the real world, you're now going to have to work for it. How do you balance that when it's, like I said, it's the parents are driving the boat, the kids are shotgun because they're young. And what are your thoughts on they're experiencing the nice stuff, but knowing that they're constantly reminded that they're going to have to work for it by getting those menial jobs and doing it?
It's a balance. I mean, we also like to be generous to our kids and do nice things. And one way I can answer it is when our kids were young, I wasn't on a plane until I was like 22 or 24. It was the first time I went on a plane. My kids were in car seats going on planes to exotic places. And we took a cruise when they were like maybe 5 and 8. And it was one of these.
We used to drive down to Florida. There was no flying to Florida. We drove to Florida.
We did that. Big Chevy Impala, 3 of us in the back seat. Somehow we did it in 2 days. Nightmare. And it was character built. And you know what? Those were great. We would stop at a crappy motel that had a pool in the parking lot and had the best time. And we had those little cereal boxes that you cut it open and pour the milk in, and you got the Frosted Flakes. It was the best day. And it was like Michelin breakfast. And we loved it. I have no negative feelings about any of it. It was all awesome. Crappy motels all around the U.S. and awesomeness. So we would go on a cruise, and I said, this cruise is going to cost a lot of money. Mom and I work really hard. It's going to cost a big chunk of money. And if you're going to want things like this as you get older, you guys are going to have to figure out, ways to get jobs and pay for it. Or if it's not that important to you, you could have a simple job that maybe doesn't make that much money and you're happy and love a simple life. Always left that option open, so it wasn't, pressure to have some level of financial success. But I remember on one of the cruises, we went to I think Royal Caribbean private island, which was really part of Haiti, which is a really poor country. Oh, yeah. And I told them ahead of time in talking about sort of money and how fortunate we are. I said, we're pulling up in a floating luxury hotel up to this really poor island. It's going to be beautiful. flowers and trees and stuff to eat and drink, and everyone from the boat's going to have their fun little time. I said, I guarantee you that there is going to be a fence behind all the trees and bushes. There will be a fence. And I wouldn't be surprised if some really poor people are just looking through the fence to see what's going on. So, of course, when we get there and we're having fun, they ask about the fence. I said, let's go see if we can find it. And we sort of walk through the bushes and trees, and there it was. And they sort of got a sense of there are people who are just hurting to stay alive. And on the other side of this fence, we're having a big party. So what do you do with that? Often on these cruises, there's a chance to go into the local community, which a lot of the tourists don't even do. They're afraid. I always took that opportunity. And I said, rather than buying stuff from the tourist trap group of little stores right by the boat on the dock, which some local rich guy owns and prevents any of the money from the tourists to go to the local people who are struggling, let's always try to go far from the port. And we'll do it in a safe way and teach them how to be as safe as possible. Even if something, someone's asking for $5 for something you think is worth $3, give them the $5 as a way of saying, thank you for sharing your beautiful country with us, and spend our money with little merchants and craftsmen and sort of people making local food. Try the food. Look at the trinkets, find something cool. Don't barter on the price, even if you can, because for us, $5 is not a big deal. For them, it makes a difference. So it's a way of showing them there's a sense of gratitude. There's appreciation for what we have. There's really like the 50-year-old guys with the purple feet. It's like stark, how fortunate we are, and how to really appreciate that, and how to make sure, our family value is to give back. Make sure you're living your life in a way that there's a fair wage for the workers at the sushi place, that the poor people in Haiti get, not handouts, but if they're making nice crafts, if they're making nice fried bananas, whatever it is, let's go away from, the easy tourist trap and try to spread our money in a way that helps the people who are sharing their country with us. Just a couple of ideas about how to balance all that. You don't have to not go first class or, take a nice vacation, but put it in context for the kids in real ways.
I'm going to use family business, and I think that this probably translates over to family wealth in a different way. But, to second generation success rate is like 30 to 40%. Third generation, it goes down to like 12% success rate in the business continuing. And I could almost say that you can maybe translate that to family wealth, and family wealth getting extinguished over a couple of generations. How do you create something that transcends beyond you and your children, which is something that you have more than likely the most direct influence over, so that this way that continues to move forward just in terms of character building and, developing good people and good habits and, good processes around the money and dealing with family and money dynamics?
So first, I want to just push back a little bit on the statistics. It's a really big kind of hot issue right now in this field I'm in. And I'll give a tip of the hat to Jim Grubman, who's a researcher, academic consultant in this world. And he's really looked at the research that seems to show 70% failure rate in the first generation to second, and the numbers you quoted. And the research is really pretty awful. It's a very small group of businesses that they use to do it. And it's problematic in a lot of ways. At the same time, just because the research is crappy and might not stand on its own, a lot of professionals and people out there in this world see first to second generation, certainly a lot more of those happen successfully than second to third. And just seeing families go from mom and dad and the kids, where they're all in the same family, to that next generation where people are marrying in, they have different values, the amount of people grow. A lot of us see that 70% seems to feel about right. So even though the research is problematic, there are probably better ways to do research that proves out what we're all seeing, and who knows what the real numbers are. But I just sort of say that because it's a hot topic right now. Is quoting.
Yeah, I don't know if those numbers include actually active second generation when the parents decease, or if it's parents decease and then second generation comes into revive, revitalize, or transact.
Yeah, and just a lot of in the actual famous research, that's one of the main ones quoted, they just didn't use a large number of businesses, and there was sort of a lot of issues. Also, there's the issue of...
So you think that that's more third generations, probably 30% success rate, second generation is a lot higher?
I don't even know. Research is kind of problematic. So people are looking at ways to research it better.
How do you think about this transcendence beyond your generation and your children to going further into something that's sustainable and helps to build character and helps to build good habits. And
Yeah, look, certainly a lot of, the thing I was just quickly going to say before is we don't know how many times families decide to sell a business. So the research that typically 70% failure rate, failure was not the original research. It was do not exist or something like
Right,
that.
right, right.
So it didn't, people were assuming fail, whereas some people chose to sell a business for a couple $100 million, and that's part of the didn't make it to the second generation. Anyway, just to set that aside, to get back to the main part of the question, it's all the stuff we've been talking about. It's values, and be clear about family values, and walk the walk, and give your kids experiences that allow them to be challenged and enjoy the fun of being challenged and the feeling of pride when you successfully, you know, meet a challenge or fail and then get up and try again. It's having those kinds of experiences. It's living the family's values. It's developing with intention a family culture around whatever it may be, a family culture of, you know, giving back, a family culture of, you know, entrepreneurism, with, you know, good values attached to it, whatever it is, and having sort of family meetings and ways of naming the family culture and letting the subsequent generations have a voice in describing the culture. So it's not just grandma and grandpa or mom and dad, but we get to say values that are important to us. We get to use family resources to impact the world, maybe in ways that are different than mom and dad and grandpa, but they're important to us. And doing all those things with a sense of intention, having family meetings, whether it's twice a year or quarterly. These things also get very tricky as people marry into the family. They come from other families. They have families too. And there's sort of blinders that sometimes happen in the wealth creating family, that we're the primary and we need to have 4 quarterly meetings and we need to have these vacations together because we need to do this for family wealth, you know, continuity reasons. Well, there's all these other people, they have families and they might not be wealthy and they might still want to have vacations and things too. But, you know, that's just a place where this gets tricky. But in terms of
how do you deal with the family wealth being, you know, because I think most of it is, even when you think about the estate planning portion of it, it's always, you know, keep it in the line of the blood, bloodline trust, that just keep it, you know, down the family that it all stems off of. But then to your point, you have married in lifestyles, things that you want to create, and you don't want to isolate that person, because by isolating them, you're almost damning them.
Yeah.
How do you work with that?
And prenups, I was just doing a whole session on prenups with a wealthy family in the Midwest yesterday, and talking about this, and it's really tricky. Like, people try to frame it as, well, it's really about fairness and starting early discussions about, you know, money and values. You can put all these nice flowery terms, but when it comes down to it, you're often having someone who's got significant financial resources and someone who has far fewer to little or no financial resources. And you're saying, we need to keep this separate if this doesn't work out. And if it works out okay, I'll share my money with you along the way. And that's a really intense, tough conversation. And it could be off-putting to someone marrying in. So the prenup is a really specific version of that. But just, you know, in general, if you're having all these family meetings and vacations to try to keep the family culture going, you could easily turn off people who marry in and still love their own families, who may not be wealthy and are fun to go on vacation with. And you see that a lot.
Somebody's here listening, family business, and they're maybe early in on the process, maybe kids are involved. Top 5 issues, flags, or things to think about, or transformational concepts that you'd like to share before we get off?
Yeah, just give some thought to how do you handle conflict and whatever your style is around it. Can you be a little more polite, compassionate, direct, and really form a culture where you can talk about various conflicts, whether it's family or business or money or some combination of those, because being able to talk about it's really important. The idea of meritocracy, so you get involved in managing or investing the family's resources or operating if there are businesses. How do you earn your way in? How do you get really clear on expectations? How do you enter the business? How do you prove yourself? How does the family make decisions about future leadership? How are we going to make decisions about future ownership? You know, just like businesses have governance for how the business is run, families need governance. How do we pick leaders? How do we, distribute ownership? What are the rights of owners? Like the high school kids can understand these concepts. There are responsibilities of being an owner and there are entitlements, and to start to help them flesh that out. Those are some really, really key things. I mean, the conflict piece, the meritocracy, for sure, are two big things to think about. Are you walking the walk with meritocracy, and are you able to manage differences and conflict? Are a couple of big ones.
I think I'm just going to add two more, if that's okay. One of which is, I think this is relevant to any business, is right people, right seat. And knowing and understanding what the strengths are of your children when they're coming in, that, to your point, they're not just pigeonholed into a leadership role if that's not where their strength is. So really identifying right people, right seats. But I'd also say having the right hat on when you're having those discussions. I think everybody wears multiple hats when they are business owners or are related to the business owner. And for let's say the father of a business, which would, in this case for me, be me, I've got my father hat. I would have my maybe a partnership hat because maybe they come in and they've earned some right to equity. And I have my role in the business. So
and you might be a trustee depending on how your estate plan goes, and that can be really tricky.
So role in the family, role in the business, and role in the ownership. And when are we talking about which? Because the example of the sister and saying, this is the same shit you used to do with me when I was kids. Being able to pull it back and say, hey, listen, we're not having conversation as brother and sister or sister and sister or brother and brother. Right now, we're talking in the leadership role of the business and staying in that lane. And if we're going to have a different discussion that's going to be about our personal relationship, well, that's a different hat, different time. Let's finish where we are here, unless the only way we can get there is by taking this off. And then we're not talking about the business. So being able to really moderate some of those conversations, I think, are important.
Yeah, totally agree.
So from your perspective, what shaped you as you start to work with family businesses? What has shaped you in your own personal experience?
Yeah, it is really personal. Basically, my dad was a blue collar guy, went into the Army right from high school, working in commercial printing as like a craftsman, hated working for other people. And at some point, he and my mom just took all of their savings and a home equity loan, which was terrifying. He started his own business. At first, it was terrifying because it was slow and everything was on the line, and we knew it as kids. And then it was terrifying because it was growing quickly, and he never ran a business, and he was struggling. So I was in college and trying to help him out. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't interested in commercial printing. I was just trying to help Dad, who was drowning in this.
And how did he handle with that stress and that anxiety?
That's right where I'm going, man.
Okay.
And he was awful. He was nasty and angry and snapping at me and treating me in kind of a humiliating way, a lot of being yelled at in front of other people. It was awful. And he was just losing his shit because it was over his head. And I was just like a good puppy dog. I kept going back, and my mom saw this. This is a real honest answer to your question of how I got into this, as honest as it gets. And my mom saw this and she said, man, this is going to ruin their relationship. This is not what I signed up for. So 40 plus years ago, in her wisdom, before this was really much of a thing like it is today, she found a family therapist who specialized in working with families in business. And it really is much more common now, but she found it. And we approached her, my dad and I, and she said, I'll work with you guys, but I want your sisters and your mom here. I don't care if they don't even work in the business, which they didn't. Mm-hmm. She said, this is a family issue. I want all of you. Long story short, we got into stuff, and she was exploring with my father kind of his anger and his history. And he talked about how his father, my dad's father, and he's telling us for the first time in this session, how his father escaped the Nazis, were Jewish, somehow got to Mexico, got to America, but his whole family was wiped out. And my dad was saying how his father was a really angry guy. And the therapist said, was he like a hitter? And my dad said, yeah, everybody was hitting back then, and they were using the belt. And I'll never forget this. The therapist said to my dad, was it like once or twice or like 100 times, trying to get a sense? My dad got this really glazed over look on his face, and we all knew it wasn't once or twice, but he said, I don't really remember. Like, he just sort of dissociated from it. It was freakish, and we all knew must have been pretty bad. What was awesome was right after that, he said, when I was going through all that, I made a commitment to myself. I knew I wanted to have kids one day. And when I was getting hit by a grandpa like that, I said to myself, I will never lay a hand on my kids. And my sisters and I were like, holy shit, we never thought about it that way. Dad was a yeller, but he never touched us. And we didn't realize the yelling sucked, but what we didn't realize is what it could have been. And in that moment, we realized Dad intentionally didn't do to us what was done to him out of love. The yelling sucked, but there was like suddenly the yelling, which was awful, was turned into an act of love. An act of love. We didn't see it until that moment. So it clarified something awful was actually loving, and it was beautiful. So I said, hey, I'm done. This is not good for us. He agreed. I went into sales and marketing after I finished college. I had a good run at a young age, and I was unfulfilled. And I said, man, I want to do for families what that family therapist did for us. I quit, walked away from a lucrative early career, moved back with my parents in my late 20s, went to grad school, and I trained as a family therapist and a psychoanalyst. And 30 years ago, I started a private practice. And I really would have stayed there. But a couple of my earliest therapy patients had significant wealth or businesses, family wealth, family businesses. And I saw what they were struggling with. And I saw that there was something, an opportunity to do something that wasn't therapy per se, but this kind of consulting, facilitating that I do for families now. But that's really the very personal way of how I got into it.
You know, I think a lot of people deal with this in different ways, and it's not always the most wealthy. It's sometimes those marginally in the middle. And it still is relatively a big issue for them. And whether it's hundreds of millions or hundreds of thousands, to them, it's how do I deal with this because it's different than the way I grew up.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of evolution because you always want something that's better for your kids, and you always want to think about things a little bit differently because sometimes what got you to where you are right now isn't going to be what's going to help get your kids to the next level in terms of the way you view their success, whether it's happiness or it's monetary.
Yeah, along the way, I worked with poor families. When I was working in community mental health, I saw poor moms somehow make enough money to buy their kids Air Jordans, and the kids just expected it. So here's a poor kid who's entitled and just thinking, I need my 150 or whatever they were back in the 80s or 90s. I need my $150 Air Jordans. Mom can barely put food on the table, but she wants her kids to have these nice things. And, I didn't say it at the time, but looking back, let your kid get a job and buy his Air Jordans. You keep the money for food and medicine and heat.
But then you have the flip side of your dad got smacked with a belt in numerous amounts of times, and his gift to you was, I'm never going to hit my kids.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's a balance of really where kind of your values and what you want from, this multi-generational evolution from your nucleus to your kid's nucleus and beyond. And how do you deal with that? And having somebody, you said an advisory board. Well, if you're super wealthy and you can afford to have that in your business, then great. And if not, it's how do you have an advisor? How do you have somebody who is just going to take you out of your day-to-day shit to get perspective on what it is you're trying to accomplish? And are you actually headed in that direction, or have you gone astray?
Yep.
Well, dude, this was awesome.
Fun.
I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks.
Jeff, where do people find you if they're looking for you?
Jeff Savlov, family business, family wealth. You search that, you'll find me. My website is blumandSavlov.com, which is a real mouthful, but it's BLUM.
We'll have it all in the show notes.
SAVLOV, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you'll have it wherever people can find me that way.
Well, this was awesome. I appreciate you. And thank you, man.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, guys, Bobby Mascia here. If you've been listening to Business Unchained, you know we're creating conversations that matter. Real stories and strategies to help business owners and entrepreneurs win. We've been putting a lot of work into these episodes in our online community, bringing you content that can actually move the needle for your business. And we're everywhere. Instagram, LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, TikTok, you name it, we're there. So look, if you're getting value from what we're doing, please follow, subscribe, and drop a quick comment or like. It really helps us grow this thing. Just search Business Unchained and you'll find us everywhere.